90% Geek, we are going to be answering one of life's toughest questions. No, not what is the best tasting paint, but which is the best sci-fi universe? Warhammer 40k, Star Wars, or Star Trek? I'm going to be deciding this based upon a number of key elements that all of these universes have in common, so buckle up and let's get started. Okay, so what are the categories that I am grading these different science fiction franchises upon? Well, they are spaceships, ray guns, close combat weapons, doomsday devices, teleportation, light speed, robots, galactic empires, psychic powers, and just generally, which one is the best one if you want to live there? So, okay, let's dive straight into the first category. Spaceships. Okay, all of these different universes are centered around the idea of spaceships winging their way between different solar systems, and all centered within a single galaxy, albeit in the case of Star Wars, it's a galaxy far, far away. The spaceships in Warhammer 40,000 are colossal, floating cathedrals. Certainly in the case of the Imperium of Man, they are kilometre long. But even a basic scout ship is like, you know, a sword-class frigate is 3 kilometres long. They are massive, monolithic mega cathedrals blasting through the space with entire cities worth of populations press-ganged into running them. Take in comparison the ships of the Star Wars universe, certainly a lot of those are centered around smaller kind of little nippy fighters, and certainly little one-man or two-man ships or little freighters play a larger role than perhaps giant capital ships, but that's not to say they don't have colossal super ships. The Executor, for example, is bigger than even a Games Workshop battleship, clocking in at 19 kilometres in length. Star Trek, by comparison, I checked, the biggest Star Trek ship is still less than a kilometre if we're focusing at the very least on Federation starships here, and I am staying firmly focused on the human side of things in order to make things fair. What that means is grading all three of these, Star Wars and Warhammer 40k jump into the lead there, whilst the Federation and humanity in Star Trek is lagging a little bit behind, albeit I think their ships are very nice. Let's move on now to firepower. Okay, so again, we've focused on the fact that ships in 40k, Imperial ships, are mounting massive, colossal mega batteries that shoot shells the size of super heavy battle tanks as just a simple ordnance. Huge ray guns that could obliterate cities and can melt planets given enough time. In comparison, Star Wars, again, you've got turbo lasers, you've got ion cannons, you've got the Death Star laser, you have got massive mega weapons that can melt entire cities into glass. Star Trek, you've got phasers. I mean, don't get me wrong, the phasers are good. And, you know, torpedoes, photon torpedoes, and quantum torpedoes, all of these other elements. But I do feel that in a straight lineup between, for example, the weaponry that a starship in 40k or Star Wars might pack, or even the blaster rifles that your average, stormtrooper is packing, compared to the humble lasgun, they don't quite cut it. Compared to, a handheld phaser, they don't quite cut it. A lasgun and a stormtrooper blaster rifle, I would say, are pretty on par. Again, therefore, turning to my charts, Star Wars and 40k still neck and neck in the lead here, with the Federation of Man lagging somewhat behind. Let's move into hand-to-hand combat now. Looking at the vast variety of weapons that you have in 40k. 40k is obviously a war game. It's meant to have a variety of weapons. But power swords, power fists, massive mighty chain glaives. There is a vast variety of weapons designed to turn the average living meat and blood creature into slurry. Star Wars, we've got the lightsaber, but not only that, we've got vibro weapons, we've got Beskar weapons that can fight against even the might of like a lightsaber or stand up to like a power weapon. I would suggest that 40k just has an edge over Star Wars when it comes to hand, just in terms of the sheer destructive potential that a 40k melee weapon has over, say, some of the weapons that are available to humanity in the Star Wars universe. I racked my brains a little bit. I mean, aside from Captain Kirk's karate chop, there is the Batleth, of course, which is noteworthy within the Star Trek universe. But yeah, I did somewhat draw a blank. So This is one where I'm afraid Star Wars and 40k are again taking the lead over the Federation. Let's move now on to Doomsday devices. What would be a science fiction storyline without something that threatens to blow up the planet or annihilate a solar system? And certainly 40k has plenty of weapons which can do that. The humble Exterminatus is only the beginning of Doomsday weapons that 40k can bring to bear. If we look at what, for example, the humans during the Dark Age of technology had at their disposal, they had weapons that could snuff out suns. Life as we know it in an entire solar system could be brought to an end. Equally, for Star Wars, if we include the expanded universe, we have weapons like the Sun Crusher, a device that could detonate a star and cause it to go supernova, annihilating a solar system. Star Trek does have its share of Doomsday devices, but the most potent that I could come across really was also a device that creates life, and that's of course the Genesis device that simultaneously eradicates all life upon a planet and then remakes it into a new and vibrant ecosystem. So I'm afraid, yeah, Star Trek, you are lagging behind somewhat when it comes to causing death and anarchy compared to your two confreres in this matter. Let's move on now to teleportation, and a chance for Star Trek to regain some points here. Okay, so Star Wars is out of the running here. I checked, and as far as I can tell, there is no commonly used teleportation devices within the Star Wars universe. It's a case of, you want to get there, you're going to have to walk or fly or, swim or whatever. Star Trek, of course, is famous for the, beam me up, Scotty, or, 3 to beam up, Mr. Scott, if we quote correctly. So we are going to rack some points on the board for Star Trek here. 40k does have access to teleportation technology, but it is somewhat more risky, given that it is described somewhat akin to throwing yourself very briefly through hell in order to arrive at your destination. So there is a strong chance of you, for example, teleporting into something else and becoming fused with it, or having your soul shredded by demons on your way to your location. Hence why it's not the most commonly used method of transportation within the 41st millennium. Let's move on now to speed. Okay, so, warp speed is, of course, the most obvious example of this. I did do some interesting research into what the different factors of warp mean. The fastest speed, warp speed, that is generally used within the Star Trek universe, going by the next generation scaling system, warp 9 is the fastest generally that starships could go in the Federation, which is somewhere akin to 19,000 times the speed of light, which sounds pretty fast until you take into account that even travelling at that speed, it would have taken the Star Trek ship Voyager some 70 years to get back across the galaxy if it weren't for the various shenanigans and hijinks in which they got into. 40k, meanwhile, of course, does have a method of transmuting itself very rapidly from one location to another, and it is entirely possible to cross the galaxy in a matter of hours, or even arrive at your destination before you left in 40k. It's just that it involves plunging yourself into hell. It is a fast way of travel, but it is not necessarily a reliably fast way of travel, given that it can equally take you 100 years to arrive at your destination. So I have not given 40k as many points here as they could have racked up, albeit it is certainly a very fast way, and it's certainly faster than the very reliable warp speed that is employed by the Federation. But let's look at the Star Wars method of conveyance. Star Wars, of course, have hyperdrive. And how hyperdrive works is somewhat akin to warp space. It dips into a subdimension, a hyperdrive, a hyperspace dimension, in order to travel vast distances, which does mean it is entirely possible within the Star Wars universe to cross the entire span of a galaxy in just a couple of days, at most. In theory, you can cover vast distances in hours using hyperdrive, which is one of the ways in which, of course, the Star Wars universe makes the entire galaxy a playground for its storyline. I'm going to give Star Wars the edge in this matter, therefore, in terms of speed, and I'm afraid Star Trek is still languishing at the back end in this comparison. Let's move on now to robots. What would be science fiction without some form of robot? The most famous example, of course, is Star Wars. There is mechanoids a go-go in there. The droids are a key element to the way in which a Star Wars story is told. In many respects, the entirety of the original Star Wars trilogy and the prequel and post stories are told from the point of view of two droids, kind of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern of the Star Wars universe. Star Wars, therefore, has to clock in, I think, at the top level in this. And it's interesting to note that Star Wars has had entire armies of droids without ever really experiencing the kind of the full-blown Terminator scenario. Compare that to 40k, on the other hand, which, yes, 40k has had robots. In fact, humanity at its height during the point at which the dark age of technology, or the golden age of technology, depending on your point of view, was in full flow. Humanity had the Men of Iron, an entire race of subservient robots, abominable intelligence or artificial intelligences that would carry out their bidding for them and fight their wars for them, with the slight hindrance that they then turned against their masters in a Matrix-style fashion and tried to exterminate us. 40k therefore does have robots, but they are not necessarily as prevalent or as reliable as you would find in, for example, the Star Wars story. I had to look, again, if you look at Star Trek, there has been a number of stories, and Picard in particular expanded upon this. There have been a number of storylines that revolve around the idea of robots, but really, beyond Data and the works of Aaron Sung, for a long time, robots were a very minimal aspect of Star Trek storylines. And therefore, again, I'm afraid Star Trek is going to drop in terms of points, albeit they are not as dangerous to mankind as the robots in 40k are. Let's move on now to Galactic Empire, to Galactic civilization, shall we say. Well, I mean, humanity, as we know, it is an imperium of over 1 million worlds. It is a galaxy-spanning human empire, albeit there are pockets of resistance where, for example, the Tau or the Orcs, or we just don't talk about what's happening in the Ghoul Stars, are going on. The Star Wars universe, again, it would seem that if you take into account kind of the Grand Republic or even the Imperial Grand Empire of humanity, it does span much of the galaxy, but there are pockets of wild space and other civilizations around the edges that, the rim, in the case it's described as in Star Wars, that are kind of not entirely part and parcel of that same civilization. Star Trek, on the other hand, have got a solid, dependable, peaceable civilization. It's just that the Federation space only takes up about less than a quarter, really, of the galaxy. So in terms of scale of its civilization, although it is, I would suggest, perhaps certainly a preferable civilization to that of the Star Wars and 40k universes, and more on that in a few minutes, it is not in any way, shape or form as galaxy-spanning as the other two franchises. So I'm afraid, again, Star Trek is lagging in points on that one. Let's move on now to psionics. Okay, so there's no bones about it. 40k have the most potent psykers. You might think Star Wars would clock up the points in this one with, you know, the Force and Jedi, but they are very limited. And this is something that always surprised me about Star Wars, is that for something that permeates the entirety of the galaxy, that surrounds and flows through everything, very few individuals seem to be aware of the Force or have the ability to tap into its extrasensory powers. In Star Trek, likewise, there are psionic races. In fact, there are entire races of telepaths, which is just treated in the same way as, oh, you know, they've got green eyes, and oh, they can read minds, apparently. But it doesn't have the same impact unless we talk about strange energies that give vast celestial powers for an episode. They don't have the same impact as, well, let's talk about it, 40k. If you could ever, for example, pit a Jedi, even the most powerful Jedi that might ever have lived, against something like an alpha-level psyker from 40k, it's not even going to be a contest, to be honest. Alpha-level psykers in 40k can literally rewrite reality. They are full-blown Star Trek-style strange energy beings, but they're just born that way. If we look at something like, for example, the highest level psykers like Malkador or the Emperor of Man, these are beings who are eternal, immortal, can change the fabric of reality around them to suit their whim. They have vast and almost unfathomable powers compared to the other two franchises. I am giving the points to 40k here. Let's move then into the final category, which is which of these civilizations would I like to live in? I don't want to live in the 41st millennium. I really, really don't want to live in the 41st millennium. It is a dark time. It is a macabre and terrible time. And if I ever even managed to appear there in my current form, I would almost certainly either be turned into a servitor or burned as a witch or tortured to death or flayed alive or devoured by alien life forms. It is just not where I want to be. The Star Wars universe. The Star Wars universe definitely has a lot going for it. Certainly it's got some high-level adventures, and in the upcoming Skeleton Crew movie, we've seen that, for example, there is even like whole planets that just have, you know, the burbs, and they are just living their lives, living their best lives. On the other hand, it is also a place of danger, a place of, you know, roving space pirates, smugglers, bounty hunters. It is, under the Empire, a time when a vast and terrible fascist organisation is crushing the life out of everybody and exterminating or enslaving whole species. It's certainly still better than 40k in terms of somewhere that me, with my current modern Western sensibilities, would want to live. But I don't necessarily think that it's somewhere that I would choose over now, for example, albeit I would love a lightsaber. I mean, that would be really cool. I could make toast with it. Let's move on then to Star Trek. Okay, there's no bones about it. Star Trek is a utopia. Yes, they may butt up against other civilizations that have different ways of living that are perhaps anathema to how we might view things now. Certainly they've got threats like the Borg, or, you know, the impending war against Klingons that might break out at any moment. But for the majority of the citizens of the Federation, it is a time which is post-scarcity. They can live in a land of plenty. They don't need to do a job to survive. They do what they are passionate about and get to explore the galaxy if that's what they want to do. Yes, I have some concerns about the militaristic aspects of Starfleet, but that means it's made clear within the Star Trek universe that you don't have to be part of Starfleet if you want to explore space. There are other avenues open to you. I think genuinely this is where Star Trek, perhaps on the other two, beats the other two, and I could be accused of skewing the results on this. But whilst I think all of these other ones perhaps have more potent and more dynamic sci-fi elements, in terms of what is sometimes described as wishful fiction, Star Trek, I would suggest, wipes the board here. And you'll see it from my end graph here. It is a science fiction dreamland that I can only love the stories from, and would, if I were given the option of living in the Star Trek universe, perhaps in the time of Jean-Luc Picard or even Captain Kirk, you know, or Pike and the Enterprise crew as the appearing in Strange New Worlds, if I could choose to live in that era or this one now, sign me up, beam me up. Okay, well, on that bombshell, I'm going to leave it. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments below if you disagree with anything I've said or there's some glaring inaccuracy that I have missed. I'd love to hear from you about it. Otherwise, I will catch you next time. Bye for now.